everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you to everyone online. I know we have a strong contingent online as well. Again, thank you so much for being here tonight for tonight's screening and discussion of The Price of Silence, Part 1. This documentary, Part 1 of 2, and soon to be 3 in a series, shares the history of New Jersey's enslaved people, centering descendants and historians telling their stories. As we'll learn tonight, New Jersey was the last northern state to end the institution of slavery. The land we gather on tonight was a place where people were enslaved by the first 2 generations of the Stockton family. Slavery was inextricably linked to the founding of the state and the maintenance of those in power. The Price of Silence, Part 1, brings to life the poignant stories of New Jersey's earliest enslaved people, tracking histories of resistance and family. This film and the work of those who will join us for the panel discussion tonight, historians Elaine Buck and Beverly Mills, and filmmaker Ridgely Hutchinson, serve as a guide point for Morven as we uncover the histories of the people enslaved here and at other Stockton properties, thanks, I should say, to the incredible efforts of historian Charisse Blakeney, who we've been working with. Elaine, Beverly, and Ridgely's dedication to connecting with the community, advocating for education, and bringing this history to everyone is a true example of how powerful public history can be. Please enjoy the film, and we look forward to convening afterwards for a Q&A discussion with our panelists. Those online can add their questions in the Q&A box. So now I'm going to turn off the lights and we'll get started with the film. Well, thank you all so much. And now we're really excited to start our panel discussion this evening. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists, and then I will invite them up to to have a discussion with us. So our panelists, we're going to start with Elaine Buck, who's the founder of the Stroudsburg-Sauerland African American Museum and trustee of the Stroudsburg Cemetery Association. She is the author with Beverly Mills of If These Stones Could Talk, African American Presence in the Hopewell Valley, Sauerland Mountain, and surrounding regions of New Jersey, and the brand new, out now, African Americans of Central New Jersey, A History of Harmony and Hostility. She is the 3rd generation to live in her home in Hopewell, New Jersey. Our next panelist is Beverly Mills, who is a founder of the Stroudsburg-Sauerland African, you can come on up, I'm sorry. Is a founder of the Stroudsburg-Sauerland African American Museum and member of the advisory board and trustee of the Stroudsburg Cemetery Association. She is the first African American woman to hold the elected position as councilwoman in Pennington Borough, New Jersey, her ancestral home and current residence, which has been in her family since 1911. She is the co-author with Elaine Buck of If These Stones Could Talk, and the brand new, out now, African Americans of Central New Jersey. Finally, Ridgely Hutchinson is the president and CFO of Truehart Productions. He was formerly the executive director of the Northeast Carpenters Apprentice Training and Education Fund. He now serves on the Community Advisory Board of NJPBS and is vice chairman of the board of New Jersey's Educational Facilities Authority. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So I wanted to start, so prepare your questions, but wanted to start with a question. Could you talk a little bit about how you each became involved in the documentary and subsequent parts of the series as well? We can start with you, Ridgely, since you're closest here.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight, and it's really an honor to be in such a historical location and at the same time be talking about our historical work. So I'll start from the beginning, and I have to credit public media for giving me the opportunity to learn about Beverly and Elaine's book, If These Stones Could Talk. Now, I grew up in Pennington, and I didn't grow up with these two ladies, but we were acquainted. We were very close, closely acquainted. And so when I learned of this book and the prevalence of slavery in New Jersey, I was shocked and stunned, not only because I knew nothing about it, but also because it was so close to home. And my father was an English teacher at the high school there for 40 years. He never mentioned it. So, you know, it also occurred to me that since I'm on the NJPBS Community Advisory Board, that we should give this book some exposure. So I spoke to the general manager, and I said, let's do a story about this. And he said, well, we can do a news review. Let's do an NJ Spotlight news piece. And I said, great. So they sent a crew, and we did a little piece. It was the very first thing. They came on location. They went up to Hopewell, and they did a 3-minute news piece. And I called them back and said, that's not enough. I want to see something more significant. And he said, well, we don't really have the funding. Why don't you make a documentary? And I said, because I've never made a documentary before. And he said, I think you can do it. He said, and if you do it, and if you do it independently, then you have complete control over the entire content of the film and the film itself. So, I got in touch with Bev and Elaine, and I asked if they'd be interested in cooperating in this process, and of course they agreed. And it's a longer story than you probably want to hear at this point, but that's how we got started.
Yes.
That's,
Thank you. And I have a couple questions on the line here. I'm going to go to you first. So from Jennifer Jang, fantastic film. Thank you to all of the panelists. My question is, what has been the most surprising aspect of your research into the history of African Americans in New Jersey? Whoever would like to start with that.
The most surprising aspect? I think the most surprising aspect is that, first of all, let's just start that New Jersey was a slave state. Okay, that was totally surprising to me and to Elaine and to many people that we present to. Common thread is they say we were never taught this in school. We never knew anything about this. I think New Jersey has been very adept at pointing the finger at southern states and kind of absolving themselves of the same barbaric system that took place in the Deep South. And I guess personally, what surprised me the most is I knew that there was a connection to Virginia, where on my paternal side, I knew that I had people that migrated from Virginia that had been enslaved down there near the border of North Carolina. But I didn't realize that I was the descendant of enslaved people that were born in New Jersey. So I think that might be the biggest surprise when starting this research for my personal story.
And I kind of feel the same way, because when Beverly and I decided we'd start doing our research, and we started looking at the names that we were finding, we were like, that's my great-great-great-grandfather and our grandparents. And we think, how did we not know this? We're not spring chickens anymore, and we literally just found out about it when we wrote the book. And so that's why we decided, you know what, we better put this information in a book, because the people that I grew up with, they knew this information and didn't really say anything, like, Uncle Albert that is buried in the Highland Cemetery in Hopewell. he knew everything about everybody, but we never got to the point where people
No.
were actually enslaved.
No, he just knew the connection of families. He was the one that told me, and I remember having a conversation with him, and he was getting up in years, and I remember he said to me, "All right, whatever information you want to get, honey, you better hurry up because
it
it's
now."
leaving, it's
Yeah.
leaving." And I remember him saying to me, I think this is around the time that the name Blackwell came up. And he said, "Well, you're Blackwell, don't you know that?" And I had never once heard that surname. And I'm like, "Well, I went to school with Blackwells, but they were white." Well, come to find out that my fourth great-grandfather was born in Hopewell Township, enslaved with the Blackwell family.
I think the most surprising thing to me was the sheer prevalence of slavery in New Jersey, the numbers and the fact that it was so well hidden. And, you know, before I wanted to get too far, I tried to find out if, number one, anybody else was like me, and it turned out everybody else was like me. I'd venture a guess at 80% of the population of New Jersey. And I sit on a board for the state of New Jersey, and all of those board members, they didn't know. I mean, even the attorneys at PBS, when they vetted the film before they aired it, wrote back to me, "Everything looks fine." And boy, Ridgely, I really learned something. You know, so it wasn't just secluded to people without a college education like me. That it was, I think, really surprising. And then, you know, the farther you go, the more you learn and the more surprised you become. And, you know, I also became, from the very beginning, very concerned about the friends that I hung out with in the 70s that were black, and no one acknowledged this. And what was it like for them? What was it like for them to, you know, just to go through life every day and not have anyone even recognize or acknowledge the fact that you know, what their ancestors had gone through? And, you know, the political climate in the country right now also was a really strong driving force. So, and lastly, I researched everywhere I could to find another documentary about slavery in New Jersey, because I said, you know, I don't want to be the second one to do this, or I don't want to have to, you know, try and measure up to something else. And no one's going to want to see it if there's already one, and there wasn't. There really was not anything.
Thank you. Any questions? We have a couple questions online. I'll take a couple questions. If you please, Mike. Thank you so much.
In your research so far, could you comment on what happened in New Jersey during the Reconstruction period in terms of land ownership, access to education, and so on?
During the time of Reconstruction, I'm thinking about my Clark side that came from Virginia. They came to New Jersey shortly after Reconstruction. I do know that the enslaved people, the formerly enslaved people, I mentioned the Blackwells, they were actually able to purchase land, which to me was kind of surprising, but it seemed that it had to be a personal relationship with someone that they knew, someone that had been connected to the family that they were enslaved within. So that's how it seemed like relationship trumped anything else. That was also on the Truehart side. They were able to acquire some land to get a house and a farm and what have you. So those opportunities did open up in my family. So I really wish I could elaborate a little more about, how Reconstruction shaped the lives of other, enslaved or formerly enslaved people, but I can only speak from my family side.
And in our second book, we do talk about how our communities were built. And so when you did our research, we noticed that, of course, there would be the AME Church in
Yes.
Pennington, which sits still today on Main Street, on South Main Street in Pennington, and how those houses were connected to the church. And then I live in Hopewell Borough, and my family has always lived there. And so we have our second Calvary Baptist Church. We actually have 3 Baptist churches in Hopewell. We have the Old School Baptist Church, and we have Calvary Baptist on Broad Street, and then Second Calvary, which they called the First Colored Baptist Church of Hopewell. Now, I don't know who called it that. I hope the church members didn't, but that was back in 1896, so I don't know. All I know is when you look at the building of the community there in Hopewell Borough, all the black people lived on Columbia Avenue, and then, of course, now the church is sitting there on Columbia Avenue. It was a couple streets over on First Street, but the same with
Pennington.
With Pennington,
Yeah,
so.
when she was mentioning the building of community, on South Main Street, where I still live, by the way. I live in a home that I think Greer mentioned. My family has owned since 1911. It was built in 1856. I know that was prior to the Civil War. But what was interesting about that business transaction is that my third great-grandfather, who was the son of Frost, turned out to be very enterprising, and he had a relationship with the Bunn family. And the Bunn family were the founders of the Methodist Church in Pennington. And the residents had been meeting in private homes, the AME congregation. And he offered a piece of land that he owned on South Main Street and said, I will sell you this land before the express purpose of you building your AME church. So that's how our community started to spring up. And he also sold off some other parcels, which one of my house is included in some of the other historic homes on South Main Street that was built for the black population.
And our Beverly's family and my family both came from the Danville, Virginia area. And so I knew my great-grandparents, and I asked them, I said, why did you come to Hopewell? And they came for work. And of course, they were sharecroppers, which
You're still
that's
a slave.
another name
You're
for
still
a
a slave.
slave,
You're still
because they
enslaved.
still talk about how they worked the whole year, and then the person, the Hale family, at the end of the year, they told them they didn't really make that much money, so then they didn't get paid, and so that's still an enslaved person in my book. So they moved up to New Jersey to work, some of them on the railroad and some of them on the farms and other domestic work.
Yeah, to Elaine's point, my understanding is that the Reconstruction era never lived up to be what it was supposed to be. And that's what really forced or caused a lot of probably all of the Great Migration, which incidentally is what our next film is about. So, when you're studying and researching the past, you end up finding yourself in the present. And that's what we've learned through a lot of this research, I think, all of us.
Absolutely.
And so, I don't think New Jersey was any exception to what went on down in the South as far as Reconstruction and that era where things were supposed to be, where things were supposed to sort of have the way paved for them that never happened.
No.
And part two is, and my comment about finding ourselves in the present when we're studying the past, if you get a chance, you can watch part two of our film, but we ended up talking about the current disparities that still exist today because of what went on back then.
Thank you. And definitely a plug for part two. Fantastic. And a really wonderful continuation of part one, and in many ways, like you said, connecting to the present. We have quite a few questions online here, so I'm going to touch on a few from Sharice Blakeney, our colleague. Excellent work. I cannot wait to see part 2. I have conflicting feelings learning of Friday's story. On one hand, I have so much joy knowing that he's found and honored through this film. On the other hand, I'm heartbroken by what we've learned. Beverly, can you share some of the reactions of your relatives after learning about Friday and his mom, Dinah?
Well, first, I mean, I believe that many of them were just thrilled to have a name, the connection to a name, because African Americans go through life not knowing anything about where we came from. If you watch anything on PBS with Skip Gates, you know that when he does the show Finding Your Roots, he often says, you know, for African Americans to go back more than 3 generations, it's a miracle. I have been able to go back 5 generations because of the information provided by Oliver Hart in his diary. And he had this diary that he was writing down, you know, everything that was happening in Charleston and who he was ministering to and other different things and typhoons and whatever. And so his entry about the purchase of Friday and Dinah was very significant, extremely significant. That's something like that. That's like gold for African Americans to find something like that. When you can see this is the person that actually purchased your ancestor and how much he paid for them and the date, it was like, I believe I was still working then when I found the diary, and I think I just kind of sat at my desk and wept.
He was 3 years old.
He was 3 years old when he was purchased, along with his mother. So my family has just been grateful for that information. And I know, Sharice, it's really, it's a bittersweet story, of course, because he was taken from Charleston at the age of 13, brought to Hopewell with his master, Oliver Hart. And I'm thinking to myself, what is this 13-year-old kid doing, you know, every single day of his life? What was it like? I know I have grandchildren that were 13. It's like, good Lord, you know, it's a baby, really. When you think about it, it's a child. It's a child.
And to be taken away from your mother and never see your mother again.
Yeah, so, you know, to be able to endure that and to eventually marry and have his own children and become a landowner, it's, you know, it's a success story, but it's a tough way to get there.
And you know, one thing that makes me happy about Friday's story, so he comes here, he's 13, and he lives the rest of his life out here in the Sourland Mountains, up by Hillbilly Hall, by the way. And we always have landmarks, a bar for our landmark.
A drinking hole.
Yeah, a watering hole. And so now when we have our museum, our SAM Museum, and it's Stoutsburg Sourland African American Museum. It's located on Hollow Road in Skillman. And now we have the property next door to the museum. Well, the descendants of Friday owned that property. So look how that turned out for us.
Yeah.
And so
That's why
we're
I'm-
really
it's-
happy
yeah.
that it turned out like that. It doesn't always, but.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions in the room before I grab one online?
Are you hoping to get your film played in schools as part of a curriculum? And
Excellent question.
Yes.
Oh, is there a part
well, the
2?
follow-on is, if you have tried so far, you know, how's it going?
It's going really well. So since we first aired the production, it's gotten a lot of attention, and we've traveled around the state to schools and done screenings just like this with the cast members. We did one as far up as Plainfield, and there was over 200 people at that one. And I've also worked with, and so I've been working with Hopewell Township's, Hopewell Valley's superintendent, Dr. Rosetta Treese, and she's assigned a couple of her history teachers, and we're working together to put together a study guide that will be web-based and that will be accessible for all students. And then once we do that, we'll distribute it to the other schools. But yeah, no, I'm supposed to go to TNEC, and they're supposed to, like 350 seventh graders we're going to show it to. And it's funny, one of my other hosts that we did a screen said, "Ridgely, that's so wonderful. Now you'll have 350 disciples after they see the films." So we have done that, and we are working diligently to get that incorporated into. And that was the original. Actually, that was the original plan when I started the film, and when I signed a contract with PBS. I told them that I specifically wanted complete freedom to distribute the film anywhere I wanted to, as long as it was considered educational.
Ridgely is very humble and is not telling everyone that on October 28th, he will be going to New York City. He Emmy-nominated film, The Price of Silence, and so we're giving Ridgely a pat on the back because
I was surprised that
Yeah.
we were nominated for a New York Emmy for both films in the historical, the cultural history category, and there are only there are a total of 5 nominees, and both of our films were nominated separately, so 2 of the 5 are ours. So we're excited about it. It's at the Marriott Marquis in New York City, and there's a big gala. So we're hoping that that will pave the way. Raising the money for the original project was quite tedious, not having any past experience, but we pulled it off. But I mean, it took 2.5 years to finally get it produced from the day I started our nonprofit. But to have that type of credibility, when I go back to PBS this time, I mean, the first time it went really well with PBS, so I can't imagine it would be any harder this time.
It is so well deserved, that's for sure.
But thank you, Elaine.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.
Ridgely's father was my teacher in high school too, so we all went, grew up in the same area and knew each other, so it makes it even more special.
That's great. On the note of the film and making the series, are there, I guess it's a 2-part question, but how did you decide, all this history, all these stories, all this research, how did you choose the trajectory for each of the parts? And then the second part is, are there things that were left out, just naturally because of the runtime of the film, that are there certain things you would have liked to include?
So I'll work backwards, because I've been asked that question often, is were there things that were left out? And yes, it was heartbreaking, because, when I first wrote it, I wrote it to be a 1-hour documentary. It's a quick story. I was down at the Rowan University for the gubernatorial debate for Governor Murphy's last election, because PBS advisory board members, because PBS had the contract to broadcast it, so we were invited. I went there, and it was during COVID, and the whole stadium, the whole auditorium was packed down in the first floor. Wow. I couldn't imagine why they were because the whole balcony was empty, and I thought, that's for me up there. I'm going up there and sit in that empty. And who sits down 2 seats away from me but the new vice president of PBS? Wow. So that was a very fortuitous opportunity to pitch the film. And when he offered a half an hour, and he said, what's your budget? I said, $300,000. He said, well, could you do it with $50,000 in a half an hour? And I said, yeah, sure. So anyway, that's unfortunately, it broke my heart to break it in half like that. And then And then it turned out to actually be better because it's more adaptable to the classroom now. So things always seem to work out in this process, or they have always seemed to work out. So now I've forgotten the first question.
It was a long one. So, so the other part of the
Oh, I
question.
know. Okay, no, I'm sorry. So,
No.
so how the trajectory of the storyline. So I was inspired by, if you haven't read it and you get a chance, read Isabella Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns. So I was inspired by that because she told the story through the personal stories of three individuals and their great migration, and it's about the Great Migration and their adventure, their trek, the trials and tribulations that they experienced. And I thought, that really drew me in to the story by having a personal story that's illustrative of the bigger picture. So I tried to find a couple stories, and I found three that were, not only illustrative, but terribly wonderful stories, like Bev's great-great-great-great-grandfather and Prime. I mean, what an awful story to be enslaved, freed, and then escaped, and then freed, then enslaved again. It was just a terrible story, and I thought this is really a good example of the difficulties that they had to finding their freedom. And then the third story, which is in part 2, is about a crooked judge up in New Brunswick who kidnapped, is freed and enslaved people, and then put them on a ship with his son-in-law down to Louisiana and resold them into slavery.
Into Deep South.
Yes, yes.
So that's another terrible story, and it was as many as like 250 or 300 documented individuals who were resold into slavery, some as little as like 12 weeks old, and those stories were so powerful that I thought that would be the best way to tell this story, because who wants to watch a history lesson? It's just not interesting. It's interesting for a little while, but after a while, so I tried to do that with personal stories.
Thank you. Any questions here in the room? John?
Follow up on the selling of slaves down south. Was that primarily after the gradual abolition law of 1804 that a lot of that took place?
The Lost Souls took place.
That was, the Gradual Abolition Act was, I don't really think that it was,
I think it did take place after the gradual abolition. I think I remember. I'm
you're
sorry, we don't have that
talking
in
about
front of me,
the
but-
judge.
Yeah, Van
Judge
Winkle.
Van Winkle, yeah, that did happen after the
Did
Gradual
happen,
Abolition
because
Act.
there were freed,
yeah.
there were formerly enslaved people that were freed that he kidnapped and put on that ship. So,
If-
and that
yeah.
Gradual Abolition Act was a BS thing,
Yeah, it was-
They had to remain, if they were born into slavery, they had to remain slaves if they were women until they were 21 and men until they were 25 years old. So
And then-
that
and then,
stretched it all the way out to like from 1804 all the way out to 1830.
So, I mean, you were considered, the term that they used was an apprentice. If you were born July 1st, through an enslaved woman, if she gave birth to a child July 1st, 1804, you would be considered an apprentice until the age of 25 if you're a male and 21 for a female. So what happens to the people that are enslaved that were born prior to that? You're considered a slave for life.
The rest of your life.
Yeah.
And then tell them what happened with Friday. So Friday's about to be
Oh,
free.
yeah, he was about to be freed, and then Oliver Hart decided that financially there was culpability for the family. There was legislation that would have made, by the time that Friday was freed, the family would have to have paid a stipend of some sort until, I don't know the particulars, but it was, he wrote a codicil that said Friday will remain enslaved for another 7 years under the care of my wife, Anne. So after the 7-year period, he would have been like 33, 34 years old, which would put him over the threshold of their responsibility for him financially.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes.
The film was-
I do,
was great.
and just to further answer your question about enslaved people in New Jersey being sold into the Deep South. Now, remember, this, the Gradual Abolition Act is designed to manumit people, to eventually have, their freedom, secure their freedom. But it's business as usual down south. If anything, it's still ramping up because, of the cotton, success of cotton and the growth of cotton and rice. So the price of an enslaved person in the Deep South was like 2 or 3 times what they would have paid for someone in the North. So it was just, I will sell you south. I will sell you south. And that's what would happen.
Yeah, my understanding is there were some slavers who came up from South Carolina who were notorious for buying up these individuals and
Yes.
selling them.
Because the price that they could fetch for these bodies. And even in Virginia and North Carolina, where the primary crop was tobacco, and as the tobacco crop was depleted and not as prosperous as cotton, that they would just sell them into the Deep South where the cotton plantations were. It's all about dollars and cents.
Thanks again.
Thank you, ladies. Can you talk a little bit about your early research, how you went about it, how you organized the information, what resources you had? Because you could share or impart your knowledge to people who also have stories to tell. How do you start and go about that?
Oh, it's a cool story. She called me up and said that we needed to get out to West Amwell because someone was getting ready to plow through an area that was said to be a burial ground that had enslaved people. So we go out there and cause a little trouble, honey. And that we did. Tell them what happened to you.
Oh, well, so we got the phone call from an elderly white gentleman that knew someone that's connected to our Stoutsburg Cemetery. So Beverly and I are trustees of the Stoutsburg Cemetery. That's on Province Line Road in Hopewell, by the way. And so he called and he said that he knew that there were people buried there. And then he said, and I know some of their last names. He said Hoagland and Dowdy, and so we went to school with the Dowdys, and then we also, the Hoaglands are Beverly's family and my husband's family, and I'm like, wait a minute, there must be some truth to this if he actually knows the names of some of the people. So what we did was, first I called the Cemetery Association, and she said, you know what, call the Attorney General's office. So she gave me the number, and he said, this is not uncommon for African-American burial grounds and Native American burial grounds to be disturbed, but it is illegal. And so you need to have some press coverage and call the local authorities also when you go out there. And so, and then I always say that this whole thing is a coincidence because I was getting ready to call the authorities and I saw something in the newspaper, and I don't even get the Hunterdon County paper, so I don't know how I saw it, but it was a story about West Amwell, and they were doing something with the property that was not right. Something was going on. So I said, oh, maybe I won't call the police. But we did call the Trenton Times. And so we met out there at the site, and we met the elderly gentleman that called us. And we were there looking. I mean, clearly it was just like a rectangle like this table. And over to the right was burials. I mean, they had burial stones, and even for the turtle and the dog and everything. We were like, how are you going to run right over top of this? It's clearly marked. But the property that was going to be disturbed was in the center, and this man wanted to put his driveway right straight through the center because he had built a house for his daughter. And so we're standing there, and another elderly gentleman comes, and we thought he's going to scream at us because we parked our cars in his driveway. And he looked at Beverly, and now you take it from there, Beverly.
So, we're kind of being on the down low with all this because, we're in trouble, kind of looking around because the contractor came, in his truck and went past and he was screaming at us and everything. So, so this elderly white gentleman comes out of his house and he's looking at me. I'm like, okay. And he says, "Don't we know each other?" I'm looking at him and it's not really registering. Then he said, "My name is Al Lavery, and we used to work together." And as soon as he said his name, it clicked. And I said, "Yeah, oh, I remember you now." I said, "But it's like 25 years ago." And he said, "Yeah." And so we got to talking, and he started, to ask why we were there, and, this whole situation with the graveyard and the man and the disturbance and everything. And so he said, "Just wait here one second." He goes in the house, he comes back, and he hands me a Xerox copy of a document. It was one page out of a document, and it was the one page out of the will of a man named L. Nathan Stevenson, who was the owner of the property next door. And he had written in his will that that cemetery, that little family cemetery, was always to remain and never be touched. To remain a burial ground. So it was like, oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful.
So now, we started with that piece of paper, and then, of course, my husband and I were on the front page of the Trenton Times, and so we were like, okay, wait a minute now. But that was good because another school friend is in charge of the New Jersey archives, Joe Klett, and he said, "I definitely have the original document from L. Nathan Stevenson."
The whole will.
And so we started with the New Jersey archives. Then people would contact us and say, "I have something from my church," like the Harlingen Church had a list of enslaved people that went to the church. And so it was a good thing we were on the front page of the paper because people started helping us. And then the Hunterdon County Clerk's Office and the Historical Society and the Princeton Historical. So people were helping us and still are.
And tell them how long it took you.
Oh, gosh. We started in 2006. Yeah.
And you
we
released the book in
2018.
2018, yeah.
Yeah.
So
in her dining room, so it was a table longer than this, and it was with all our material and everything that we had all our research.
Phew.
And it was boxes and boxes and boxes. It got to the place where you couldn't see from one room to the next because it was so much. And then the task was that one day we'd have to sort all this out. For the book, which we did.
Yeah, we still, to this day, even with the second book and beyond, we still get help from people that see us, hear us, and say, "I have a connection." We literally have been here. My maiden name is Hunt, and so I'm still trying to make a connection with all the Hunts that were in this area, the white families, to see if they enslaved my families, because why am I here? I've always lived in Hopewell Borough. There's not that many black people there, but I'm there.
Thank you so much. So we have time for maybe one or two final questions, and I'm going to be greedy and take one of the final questions because Beverly and Elaine, you have a new book out, and I know that this part one of this documentary was so based in If These Stones Could Talk, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the new book and the trajectory from the first and what it's about.
I would say, we were so eager to try to get as much information as we could in the first book. I think that when we were talking from the more of a historical standpoint of, did you know? We talked about, the military presence. We talked about, how our churches were shaped. There were so many things that we were trying to just, give people this information because we were so excited about, what we had researched and what we had found. And this one now is a little more personal, I'd say. We do talk about more about how the building of communities started. She talks about, in her section, she talks about Hopewell, and how some of the Black founding families, that's like taking a deeper dive, like, well, what happened to somebody from the so-and-so family, or what happened to the people from the so-and-so family in Hopewell? So we kind of try to, do a little deeper dive, as I said, into the continuation of the story, so to speak.
And I wanted to ask one more question, which is a two-parter. Where can we find your new book, and where can we watch parts 2? And I know 3 is upcoming of The Price of Silence. So those are my 2 questions.
Well, you can find the book.
We have a couple books here with us tonight, but you actually can find the book on Amazon and all the outlets.
Yeah.
And then Arcadia Publishing actually published the book for us, so you can get copies from Arcadia Publishing also.
Right, yeah.
And the Morven Bookshop.
I was going to say, and I think you can get it from Morven Bookshop, too.
Both online and in our shop. So.
We have a few signed copies tonight, if anybody is interested.
Thank you so much.
And then Ridgely, I think.
Next up for the documentary, so where can we watch part 2, and when part 3, what the schedule is for part 3?
So you can stream both episodes from our website anytime, because I have complete ownership of this because it's educational. And so anyway, Truehart Productions, one word, Hart spelled with a H-A-R-T, truehartproductions.org. And I have business cards here if anybody would like one after the talk. And so you saw Dr. Epps in the very beginning. She was our consultant and also the scholar who made a lot of comments in the beginning. She came to me and she said, Ridgely, it's a wonderful, both films are wonderful, but you have a gap in your storyline. You went from slavery to the current disparities that exist, and you missed the Great Migration period in that story. And so, you should, and I had no intention, well, I didn't say no, I wouldn't say no intention, but, so I'm encouraged to make another episode. And so we decided to make it about the Great Migration, and I've chosen the city of Newark because there was, such a huge influx of blacks into Newark during the Jim Crow years, starting in World War I, from like World War I and right up until the 50s and 60s. But during that period, the migration from the South was, there was so much of an increase in the black population in these cities that it had a huge impact, not only on the culture itself of the city, but also on, unfortunately, the racism that was still carrying over. And they wanted to find a better lives for themselves and their families, and they were promised employment because of all the industry that was going on in the cities in New Jersey to serve the war effort during World War I and World War II. There was a real need for labor, but that had, as you'll learn when I finish the film, that had its drawbacks, and
Leave a cliffhanger.
there was quite a so we just finished shooting for the trailer last week, and so we should have a trailer released probably by the end of the year, and then we're going to go forward with raising money to complete the film.
And we forgot to say that older people are walking libraries with their oral histories. And we depend on everybody with their oral histories to help us when we're doing these projects.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight. And
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming and for this great introductions. I should take you around with me to all those screens.
I know.
That's the best introduction I've ever had for this.
That's the online people.
Yes, and let's not forget our people that are online. Yeah, thank you.
yes, thank you
for
to everyone
attending.
online, and definitely check out part 2 and both If These Stones Could Talk and Bevan Elaine's new book as well. So thank you so much and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. We did, so we try to leave cliffhangers so you'll read it in the book, because we definitely.
Now have a kind of private.
To do something and try to get, because actually, our cemetery is in Hope Township.
Right, yeah.
And they were going to try to get something so that they can protect it. Some they do.
We currently